What I'm doing right now is taking the bullet. So I'm going to be the first storyteller at my own event. I don't usually do that, but I wanted to because I wanted to give an example of how you can evolve as a performer. And it's also about a mystery that I could not quite solve for a very long time. And it starts with a St. Bernard. Everyone's going, what the hell is he going to talk about? With a look of terror in their face. The St. Bernard's kind of incidental. I live up in the mountain, and there's a guy in my neighborhood who has this beautiful big St. Bernard. He wanders it past my house from time to time. It reminded me of a horrible TV show that was on in the mid-90s. It's called Doghouse. Does anyone remember this? It was a YTV show that they sold to an American network. It was a wacky sitcom about a detective who gets electrocuted with his dog in the car, and his consciousness goes into the dog. And the dog can talk. It was a bad sitcom. I think about that when I see the dog, and I think about other stuff. I'll get into that later. The performance mystery comes out of a play that I was cast in when I was around 17 years old. It was a freaky German melodrama called Spring Awakening. Okay, does anyone know the musical? Yeah. Before it was a musical, it was like a 1890s play. It's German expressionism. It's about teens' sexual awakening, emotional awakening. They can't deal with it. The adults can't deal with it. Chaos and hilarity ensues. And it's German, so it's weird and it's dark. There's a suicide, a murder, an abortion, a couple of strangulations, and one of the characters shows up for the last act with his dismembered head under his own arm to deliver monologues. Delightful show. The cast was made up of mostly kids from my performing arts high school. I wanted to be one of the male leads, of course, because I was an actor. I did not get the chance, but I was an understudy, which was really cool for around an hour, because I thought, great, I'm an understudy. I might play the part, and they pay me a little extra. And then I thought, oh, damn, I might have to play the part on very short notice. You realize I have to memorize all the lines. I have to know all of the blocking, and I probably not get to do it. And if I do get to do it, I'm going to be terrified. The play was good. I'm not going to go into backstage drama because every backstage drama is the same. Any movie you've seen about backstage shenanigans, movie, TV show, anything, they're completely accurate. One person thinks they're more talented than they are. There's going to be a romance. There's going to be an unrequited romance, somebody who's always late, someone who can't remember their lines, and somebody who is perpetually drunk. All of those boxes got checked. The rehearsals went well, and we rehearsed out of the theater, and then we went into the Canadian stage, which is a big union house that is very technologically advanced. It's like we were rehearsing on a houseboat, and we ended up performing on a battleship. You don't need details about the backstage. Suffice to say that everybody got along fairly well. The director was crazy in a really eccentric, over-the-top way. He was either terrifying or delightful. He took off right after opening night, and on opening night, we got a standing ovation. Anybody here ever had a standing ovation? If you haven't, I truly recommend you do. If you are the receiving end of one, it's kind of like crack. So we were kind of spoiled. We got good reviews in the Toronto papers. That's wonderful. Opening night, famous. The second night slump expression does not come out of nowhere. But it wasn't disastrous. All we were told was, opening night, you were 2 hours, 7 minutes. Second night, you were 2 hours, 12 minutes. It's not a disaster. Third night, pretty uneventful. We did not get the standing ovation, but it was a Sunday night. What can you do? We were down to 2 hours and 8 minutes. The danger came on the fourth day because the director had left. There was an assistant director who was a nice enough guy. He did not actually tell us to do much, but the de facto assistant director was a friend of the director's. And they pulled us in for a meeting and began the meeting with this, and I quote, "I saw what you did last night, and I want you to know that I would rather burn this theater to the ground than ever be on a stage with any of you because you are blaspheming your form and your performance in this entire play." It went downhill from there. Around a third of the cast is in shock. Around a third is incredibly pissed off at the idea that this person, who's not the director, is throwing this at us. And the other third was kind of my cohort, because you're yelling at us. Okay, what did we do wrong? That wasn't part of the diatribe. The 45-minute diatribe dealt with, you guys don't know what you're doing, you're kids, you're puppies, you're taking advantage of your situation, you're all talking about getting agents and doing TV. You don't do that. If you are a real actor, you do not do television or movies or commercials. You only do theater. 45 minutes of a diatribe. And don't think I don't notice you, Michael, because you're quiet. I didn't even know I was quiet. They gave this long speech, and there was no follow-up. Fourth day, we were told the show felt long, but we came in at 2 hours, 6 minutes. Like, we were shorter than the original. There was never someone saying, okay, the first act is slow, or the second act is this, or you didn't miss your lines, or what have you. Nothing. We got these threats, we had this disapproval, but no one ever said what it was. And the more conspiratorially minded of us began to think, this has been done to mess with our heads. I mean, this person may have just had a really bad day and decided to scream at us, or they may have been put up to do it by the director. And that level of unsure was really odd. And there's enough to worry about. I mean, it's a big show. We had audiences of around 500 people per night. It's an expensive show. You have to remember the lines, and I'm twice as stressed because I have to watch the male lead to make sure he doesn't trip or get a cold or damage himself in some way that I will have to do the part. There were a couple of disturbances. One person messed up a line in the first act. I mean, literally stood on stage pointing to say something and then froze. Chronologically, it took 7-8 seconds. But the impact, and the audience didn't care, but the impact on the cast was something else. After the show, nobody walked up to this guy and said, oh yeah, way to go, dude. Everyone was very quiet and said, you know what, happened to anybody? No one cares. Because everybody who watched that thought, there but for the grace of God go I. We had that. I had a scare because the male lead came in one day. The rumor was that he was drunk. He was 16, and the local pubs did not exactly card people, especially if you were in a play. He may have been drunk. He may have had a cold. He may have had the flu. All I know is that the stage manager put his hand on my shoulder and said, Michael, how long would it take you to be ready? That leap between, oh, I'm never going to play the part. Oh, damn, now I have to play the part. I did get in the costume. Unfortunately, this guy had 3 cups of very strong lemon tea and cleared their throat and managed to get through it. That was nice. All these kinds of little problems, and every so often we would hear, you know, you guys, you got to keep your energy up. We would hear at the end of the show, 2 hours, 6 minutes, 2 hours, 4 minutes, 2 hours, 2 minutes. We would congratulate ourselves for doing it properly, and then various cast members, the adults, would say, you guys really have to get your energy up, and nothing else. Maybe this is just what happens. This was our first show. We are trying to learn our performing chops. We know the basics, but the politics and the chemistry is something we're trying to learn. But we did get through the show. One major mess up. Second act, the last scene is a 5-page monologue by a guy sitting on a cloud, hanging off the ceiling with his head under his arm through some really interesting theatrics. And it's a 5-page scene between himself and one guy on stage. And we are all backstage. We're taking our makeup off. We're ready for the curtain call. We're listening to this through the loudspeakers. And the guy in the cloud starts his piece, and it's page 1 of 5, page 1 of 5, page 1 of 5, and then page 5 of 5. He leapt 5 pages. The panic in that moment is something I will never be able to describe. The adult who had to finish the scene was still getting into costume, managed to grab a dressing gown that kind of looked like a costume, ran on stage, saved it by bouncing back 4 pages, putting himself into a scene he was never in and just kind of lingered. And it was such a freaky expressionist play, he got away with it. That's a lesson right there. And we had the conclusion, we had the closing night, big party, all was forgiven, the diatribe is in the past, the person who gave it to us was sweetness and light at the party. And none of us knew whether this was on purpose or not. And I held on to that for a long time, like a very, very long time. But around 8 years later, I guess the term is I had some scar tissue by that point. 8 years later, I have gone through the Toronto Fringe Festival where I was in a play where the first act is the entire cast in a large fabric bag on stage. I can't make this up. It was a sound exercise, so people would come in and see this bag, and then as the lights dropped down, we would all stand up in the bag and stretch it at bizarre angles so we look like a blob. This struck us all as a good idea at the time. I had been in that. I had been in a musical where I dressed up like Mozart and played keyboards. I was in a play that got savaged by the Globe and Mail. It was called The Mess of Beauty. And the Globe and Mail review said The Mess of Beauty is indeed that, a mess. I didn't write it. I mean, I'll defend it to my dying day, but I got that, and I was stressed out. This is the 8 years later. I'm stressed out because I've rented a theater for a play that I am directing, and when I rented the theater, it was 4 walls in a nice dark room, and by the time we started to do the play, they had knocked a wall down. So it wasn't a dark space anymore. There was a large window looking at Jarvis Avenue in Toronto, and I couldn't rent curtains because they didn't have any. All of these weird theatrical performance-based stress indicators, and I'm folding laundry to calm down, and I'm watching stupid TV, and I'm watching that stupid show with the St. Bernard. And on the couch, talking to the St. Bernard through the miracle of special effects, was that person who yelled at us about never doing TV or film or commercials. 3 years earlier, I would have called every human being I knew to explain exactly every facet of how that was hypocritical and horrible. But by the time I saw it, I just thought, maybe they had a dentist bill. Maybe they like talking dogs. Maybe it's none of my business. You need to get to a certain level of being comfortable on stage. I mean, I don't care what you're doing. If you're singing, if you're dancing, if you're doing magic, if you're doing poetry, anything. You have to have a certain level of comfort, and you also have a certain level of, I will deal with whatever abuse comes up. The audience isn't different, you deal with it. If you lose your lighting kit, you deal with it. If it's too cold, if it's too hot, if you feel underpaid, anything. You have to deal with it, and there has to be something in you that loves the form enough to deal with it. And I can't explain that offhand. It's quite simply, you have it or you don't have it. You've got the desire or you don't. So for this particular performer who has since passed away, I want to make it very clear, I'm not trying to slag them or their attitude or the way they treated us. This was a minor incident that felt resonant at the time. And it isn't. It just took me around 8 years to realize, hey, these things happen. So wherever they are right now, quite genuinely, I hope they're smiling. Cheers.